3 weeks in Great Britain, March 15th to April 5th, 1976. A Travel Journal by Jackie Porter. Monday, March 15th, Windsor. After a pleasant and uneventful flight, we landed at Heathrow on time, 9 a.m., and were through customs and immigration in as long a time as it took us to walk by the officials. The passport man, so polite. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter. Have a good trip, Mrs. Porter." So refreshing. And the customs men didn't even look up as we passed, didn't stop us at all. A courtesy bus took us to the hotel where we picked up our car, and we proceeded to Windsor, after making a few false starts driving towards London on the motorway instead of the other direction. Bill finds driving on the left somewhat nerve-shattering, but he likes the car. We couldn't find our hotel, the old house, in Windsor, so we drove up to the castle and asked the bobby on duty at the main gate. He was entranced with his own directions. Left, right, left, right, left. I looked bewildered. The hotel seemed very far away, lost in a complicated mist. Not so to the bobby. "It's easy, listen again. Left, right, left, right, left." We had to agree the way he lilted. It made it sound easy. And we did find the hotel. We would have found it ourselves right away if we'd realized that those dear rosy bricks dead-ending at a pedestrian bridge were meant to be driven over. The Old House Hotel, built and lived in by Christopher Wren. Not pretentious, not tacky, just charming. Warm, welcome, and we were led through a rabbit warren to our room overlooking the Thames. Such a narrow Thames here, but filled with ducks and, of course, the Queen's swans. For fun, a couple of Canadian geese flew in. We settled in after a fashion and were off to Windsor Castle. On the way up the hill, back towards the bobby at the main gate, I realized that I was faint with hunger. There were tea shops on the street, but we bravely entered the Night, our first pub. At first, Bill thought no women, but I had already seen one, so we marched on and fortified ourselves with French bread sandwiches and marched out again. The castle was fabulous. We had it practically to ourselves, except for the Queen, of course, but she kept to her wing and, according to the warden, was about to leave anyway. Bill couldn't get over the waste of workmanship. One table was so elaborately carved on top, anything placed on it would certainly tip over. And the inlay on another was so intricate as to become a blur. Solid silver tables in one room. They belonged, it seems, to Charles I. It was all quite overwhelming. And there, in the ornate entrance hall, stood the armor of Henry VIII, in his stance, his familiar stance, legs apart. He had stamped his feet down a moment before. That man could never have shuffled his feet. But now, his bones lie quiet in the aisle of the beautiful St. George's Chapel. The colorful banners of the Knights of the Garter are still, and no wind blows the dust of Jane Seymour and Charles II, also buried there. We had dinner there in the hotel, lovely lamb chops. We were so weary. Tuesday, March 16th, Windsor and Eton. Spent the morning walking around Eton, poking into the nooks and crannies. Saw a few of the young Etonians and their tales. One passed a rather ragged street urchin of the same age, quite a study in contrasts. Then we went down to the embankment, where a tidy old man had picked up a piece of scrap paper that had held a sandwich or a cake, and was compassionately letting a group of swans remove the last crumb from it before he discarded it properly. He noticed my interest and approached to chat. He had only 3 fingers on one hand, and was accompanied by a husky dog. A very gentle, very fat, husky dog. The old man told us he disapproved of all that fat, but it was his sister's fault. Every day she went out and bought the dog chocolates. It was a brave dog, though, not even afraid of swans. But oh, how it hated water. Once, when a swan threatened it, it didn't do anything but somehow pitch our 3-fingered friend, who was on the other end of the leash, into the Thames. His father, had been a blacksmith here in Windsor and said that the castle clock was made of such strong steel that it would outlast the castle itself. He had been born and bred in Windsor, but he had never been to the castle. Why would he need to visit it? It is omnipresent. He breathes it. It dominates everything. We went on to Maidenhead to confirm our reservation and had lunch in a local Italian restaurant before we proceeded to Runnymede. We rushed like John's barons up and down the field, but not on the field, on the highway beside the field. Parking places were chained off, and the English are pressing drivers, though very courteous, Bill says. Anyway, we finally found an indentation in the road, and hugging the chain, we parked. We trudged up to the Runnymede Memorial created by the American Bar Association. And then there was more field trudging to the JFK Memorial on the acre England gave to America in memory of him. Then a wild drive to Hampton Court. Rotaries are called roundabouts here, and they all scare me to death, and I'm not driving. When we ask directions, we tend to follow the vague instructions exactly, and I don't think we're supposed to. To get to Hampton Court, we were told to go to Staines, so we did, and got off the motorway there, only to be hopelessly embroiled in Staines traffic. We realized we should have driven by Staines or through it on the big road we were on. We struggled back. We always get back on the road, but often we find ourselves driving in the wrong direction. Hampton Court was being cleaned and refurbished. They were all painting the floors with a substance that positively gripped you by the throat. Much of the furniture had been removed for cleaning, but it was all pretty impressive nonetheless. One of the caretakers told us that gardeners take flowers from the greenhouses in late spring, and the 30 men work side by side, putting them in the ground. Instant beauty. The palace has 1,000 rooms. Most of them are not open to the public. One section is occupied, as it has always been, by ex-servicemen or their widows. When the last of the present lot dies off, that tradition will end. The Queen has so ordered, for the government just can't afford it. Wednesday, March 17th. Eton and Hildeborough. We checked out of the hotel, though I was to return to it before lunch, and walked over to Eton. Mr. Gardner, a large, articulate, balding man, greeted us. He is one of the physics teachers, and we chatted for a while before his wife came in. Skirt, sweater, pasty-faced, straggly, short black hair, and rather vacant eyes that wandered over your head whenever she addressed you, but very pleasant, totally dominated by her husband. Mr. Gardner had to go to a daily meeting of the faculty for half an hour, so Mrs. Gardner brought coffee in and chatted with us. There are 50 boys in the house, ages 13 to 18, and the same ones come back each year. Caning no longer occurs since the older boys refuse to cane the younger. Mrs. Gardner could only remember her husband doing it once, when one boy nearly set the house on fire with a lighted candle hidden in a wooden box, which he didn't extinguish before he fell asleep. My presence was definitely de trop when Mr. Gardner took Bill on a tour of the labs and classes, so I went back to the hotel, but returned for lunch at 1 with the boys. They were all standing up waiting for us when we arrived. Mr. Gardner shouted out a blessing in Latin, and we all sat down. Lunch was breaded lamb chops, mixed veg, mashed potatoes, apple crumb cake with custard topping. The boys were charming, easy, articulate, and friendly. We talked and laughed about the hazards of wrong-side driving. One boy told me he worked on the Cutty Sark in the summer, and all were eager to visit the States. Mr. Gardner then shouted another Latin blessing. The boys responded and formed a sort of gauntlet through which we passed, sans wax. Mr. Gardner then took us over to the lovely Eton Chapel, St. George's. 100 years ago, beautiful dry frescoes were discovered dating from the time of Edward VI, which Cromwell had painted over and covered. They were carefully restored, though the colors are not bright, but gray and tan and sepia. The wooden roof had burned down several times and had also been damaged in World War II. Some ingenious architect designed the present one and made it of poured concrete, but it fits right in with the slim, graceful pillars of the walls and fans out overhead in a totally medieval fashion. Very impressive. In the afternoon, we started on our adventure and flew through the countryside, through ugly suburbs and charming villages. In neither could we find easy places to stop. After asking frequent directions, we stopped here for the night in Hildenborough, at the Gate, 2 miles from Penshurst, 6 miles from Chiddingstone. My, they love pink around here. Pink bedroom overlooking a rather grim railway station. The bathroom is rather grim too, but the landlord is so cheerful and willing. Thursday, March 18th. Lewis and Hastings. Cheerful he is. Whipped us up very tasty scrambled eggs while he sang Annie Laurie at the top of his lungs. We went on to Penshurst Place, a fairly large manor house that belonged originally to Sir Philip Sidney, courtier, statesman, sonneteer in the time of Elizabeth I. Sheep were grazing on the front lawn, and cows at the manger on the other side of the road. We walked past the Leicester Arms, where we ought to have stayed. It looked much better than the Gate, with its grim bathroom and cheerful landlord. Down the street, we went to a churchyard on the big-as-a-minute Leicester Square, with its big-as-a-minute post office. The postmistress could not have been sweeter. Everyone here is so kind and anxious to help and sympathetic that we had to come, in their minds, a wee bit early. Not that that has mattered to us. There's certainly plenty to see. The postmistress gave us directions to Hever Castle through the back roads, and so we really saw English country lanes for the first time. So pretty. Hever Castle was closed, but we got a picture from some distance away. It was Anne Boleyn's family home, and quite small. You could see the little moat and drawbridge. Anne Boleyn's father continued to live in it after she was beheaded, ostracized or ignored by his neighbors until he died. Over the centuries, it fell into decay until Astor bought it, restored it, and gave it to the nation. Then we went on to Chiddingstone. Or perhaps we went to Chiddingstone first. Yes, we did. Anyway, it is an Elizabethan village with roofs awry, beams awry, even the chimneys are wind-bent. Tiny windows of diamond panes. It, too, has its castle, but not open except to fishermen. It occurred to me there must be a large lake on the grounds. Then there was a toss-up between left for East Grinstead or right for Royal Tunbridge Wells. We'll never know what East Grinstead looks like because we opted for Wells and walked along the pantiles in proper fashion, stopping improperly for coffee, herring, and cheese. We asked for directions for Lewis, but had to say Brighton in the end, since the man drew an utter blank at the name Lewis. Not his fault, I pronounced it Lewes, because all the names are so shortened here, but not this one. "Oh, you mean Lewis," he said beamingly. "You can't miss it straight through." We didn't have much faith because, up to that point, we had not been able to follow any directions. One reason being that everyone seems to say left while pointing right. We didn't realize we were supposed to know they mean what they say, not what they do. We did find Lewis without trouble, and even a car park. So we climbed out and proceeded on an afternoon of climb. The main street is High Street, and indeed it is high. The castle keep is high too, high over the town, up, up, up. I was going up the last flight on all fours. The castle dates from the time of William the Conqueror. Fortunately, I had been strengthened by lunch at the Bull Inn, where Tom Paine lived several years. The big hearth held an electric fire, but the ceiling beams were there, and I could imagine the fray between the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, which took place in the present dining room. Originally, it had been a knight's house. Last in Lewis, we went to Anne of Cleves' house. Henry VIII had given it to her after he divorced her. There was her bedroom, large with a peaked beam ceiling. Her own bed wasn't there, but they did have a bed of the period, and behind it hung an Elizabethan carpet. Such tapestries must have covered the walls in her time, so the rafty, bare-boned look would not have existed. The bedroom, dining hall, and kitchen were all that were shown. Long refectory table and the usual huge hearth. We were planning to make Old Bosham, but decided it was too far, so we went to Hastings instead, where we found a lovely hotel, the Victoria, right on the sea. It was fun and pleasant and comfortable, but such a typically seaside resort place that we didn't remember to take any pictures. Very high ceilings with the window overlooking the promenade reaching from floor to ceiling with long, hard-to-pull draperies. Outside our window was the roof of the porch below. Very wide, but presumably not to be climbed out on. But I wondered, as I opened the window, what child would resist? Bill was just changing his clothes for dinner when two lovely young ladies, scarcely children, appeared on the roof. He retired with almost unseemly haste to the bathroom to continue his toilette. Friday, March 19th, Old Bosham. We left Hastings and proceeded to Beachy Head, where we climbed against strong and frigid wind to get a not too spectacular view of the chalk cliffs and the sea. Because of the pressure of time, we didn't go to Battle, but before we froze on Beachy Head, we did visit Pevensey Castle, the site of William the Conqueror's invasion. It was a Norman fort built within Roman walls. It belonged at one time to John of Gaunt, and was used practically up to the present day, in wartime that is. A cannon is there that was built during the Armada and the fortification alterations done during the Second World War when Americans were billeted there remain. The place then was studded with machine guns against Hitler's invasion of Britain, which never took place. After Pevensey and Beachy Head, we wended our way down to Elfriston, an exquisite little town, for a lunch of bread and cheese and beer. Poked around the church and took masses of pictures before moving on to Wilmington to see Wilmington's famous tall man, a shape drawn on the side of the cliff of a man holding a spear in each hand. It was made by removing the turf from the chalk beneath, but no one knows when or by whom. With Old Bosham our destination, we passed through Brighton and other seashore towns and finally arrived here in Old Bosham at the Viking Inn. Delightful. Small, surrounded by gardens which contain a 400-year-old mulberry tree. The bedrooms are all named for their different colors. We were in the pink one. Dinner not being until 7:30, we walked through the village, down to the little harbor, onto the ancient Saxon church, which is depicted in the Bayeux tapestry. King Canute, they think, may be buried in that church. But in any case, they are sure one of his daughters, an 8-year-old child, is there. The village is full of thatched cottages. In fact, we saw 2 men putting on a new roof. Bright yellow the thatch is until it darkens to its dusty brown. It is very thick, over a foot, and covered with wire to prevent the birds and squirrels from carrying it away, and often decorated at the peak. Saturday, March 20th, Salisbury. Went down to Old Bosham Harbor again, but the tide was out again. Nice walk, though. We retraced our steps to Fishburn, where we visited the remains of a Roman palace and the museum. Absolutely spectacular. Very good museum, very clear, showing Roman Britain from the beginning to the end. A large roof covers the mosaics, the palace itself. There are convenient walkways and very good signs. Bill said he could imagine people in togas walking all around. Found the Fox and Hounds in Hungerford Bottom after asking directions once, and it was great. We ate in a huge old barn filled with farm implements hung all over the walls. Long trestled tables down the center, stalls on the side. Bill had beef curry, and I had what they refer to as the ploughman's lunch, crusty bread and cheese. We got here to Salisbury about 2 in the afternoon. Being market day, the traffic was terrible. But after going round the block twice, we found the White Hart Hotel. It has a life-size plaster heart sitting on the peak of its roof. We can see the cathedral from our window, and of course, we walked all around. Bill isn't too keen on cathedrals, and I prefer the small parish churches with their individual flavor. But I do like to see the tombs and effigies of historic people I've read about, like the one of the Seymour who married Catherine Grey, sister of the unfortunate Jane. Walked around the town some more, and then came back here to the hotel, which has every modern convenience, including a TV in the room. We watched the news and heard that Princess Margaret is separating from her husband Anthony Armstrong Jones, Earl of Snowdon. The Queen, they say, is very sad. Margaret is a wild one. Had a 28-year-old lover tucked away. The press is apparently being very hard on her. She neglected her duties, it seems, and didn't apply enough discretion. As one paper put it, the British people didn't care what Margaret did. They just didn't want her to do it in the street and scare the horses. Wilson resigned last week, and the race for the new Prime Minister is on. Sunday, March 21st, Stonehenge, Longleat, and Chittick. Old Sarum was closed, but a pleasant woman told us we weren't missing much, just an empty circle of stone for a round fort. The location was beautiful. We took pictures looking back at Salisbury through the mist, and then Bill spotted gliders and tore over to the side of the hill to get pictures of them, taking off and gliding overhead. Then onto Stonehenge. Very impressive and dramatic to see as one approaches from the flat plain. Bill said it was smaller than he had expected, but still very impressive. Nicely done, too. The car park is on the opposite side of the road, and one walks under it to get to the ancient site. All commercialism is hidden. We went on, planning to visit the Road Bird Sanctuary, but a nice fellow at a gas station suggested we visit Longleat, the ancestral home of the Marquis of Bath instead, since it was pretty cold and windy to go bird watching. I'm glad we changed our plans, for Longleat was stupendous. It was built during the reign of Elizabeth I, and the present Marquis can trace his ancestry back to Mary Tudor, sister of Henry VIII, and Charles Brandon, the commoner she married after the death of her first husband, Louis of France. On the wall of the Great Hall were prehistoric elk antlers. One of the Marquesses had brought painters over from Italy to do the ceilings. It took them 20 years to complete. The coronation robes of the Marquis and Marchioness were shown, as was their carriage, in which they went to the coronation of Elizabeth II. It is pulled by hefty horses because it has no brakes. It has a beautiful library, 30,000 books. One room just on the French Revolution, all leather-bound, of course. There is a room for rare books, Chaucer et al., but alas, it was not open to the public. In a glass case was the shirt Charles I was executed in. Had a lot of big holes around the neck. Bill said, the guy missed. The original estate of 10,000 acres cost £580. The huge house, $6,000. After our tour, we went through the safari park. Giraffes, zebra, cheetah, rhino, baboons, Cape buffalo, all kind of sad-looking. Africa has spoiled me. But we followed the truck that was feeding the lions, and it was fun to see them come dashing out of the woods for their chunks of raw meat and bone. Mostly bone, poor things. Now we are in Chittick, Dorset, at the Chittick Lounge Hotel. Small, dark, beamed ceilings in the dining room. Charming. We were going to the Clock Tower Inn, but when we knocked on the door, the man said they were closed until 7, and when we asked for rooms, he announced that they were completely filled up. It didn't look like it, and Bill thinks he was having a gay old drinking party with his friends. We ate our dinner in the Priest's Hole. The landlady put us there with pleasure, saying she thought I'd appreciate it. I certainly had asked a lot of questions about the inn, how old it was, 1488, and its history. The house was headquarters of the Roundhead Army in their local campaign against the Royalists in 1645, and the trial of the Chittick martyrs took place in the main hall. Our bedroom is tiny, blue for a change, with a dormer and casement windows looking into the branches of a big magnolia tree. Next door, there is a cottage being rethatched. Monday, March 22nd. Beer, Colston, Ottery St. Mary, and Dunster. Went to the Chittick Catholic Church of the Martyrs this morning. All around above the pews are the pictures of those who resisted the savage repressions of the Protestants. Some died in prison, some were hanged, drawn, and quartered. Pictures of other prominent Catholics were also there. Sir Thomas More and poor Margaret Pole, the last of the Plantagenets, who did not go to the block as peacefully as some famous figures, but instead ran around and around the block until she was caught. Poor soul. She was 81 and her executioner only 17. He was so unnerved, he did a bad job of the whole business. We wandered down along the coast, missing, alas, many of the most beautiful views owing to fog, rain, and even snow. We lunched at Colston in a charming pub by a warm fire in the big hearth. Ploughman's again for me. Before lunch, we visited an exhibition of model railroads at Beer. They had exhibits set up to suit every room in a house. Trains for the living room, trains for the hall, trains for the porch, even trains for the garden. But none for the bath. Time pressed us, so I cut short part of the tour I had planned in the States, but through a happy mistake, we did pass through Ottery St. Mary, where the father of Samuel Taylor Coleridge was rector. It is a remarkable church, a Norman tower in which was found, after a fire-forced restoration, pieces of a Saxon cross. There was a beautiful medieval clock there, too, called the Grandison clock. I could return to Britain just to see her clocks. The Lady Chapel was built in 1190. We wound our way through the back roads with high hawthorn hedges on either side to Twerton, and shortly after that entered the Exmoor National Park, Lorna Doone territory. The road twisted and turned, following a mountain stream. Up we went until the vistas we looked at were all snow-covered. Everywhere there were sheep and hundreds of baby lambs. In a snowy barnyard, there was one wee lamb in a little coat the farmer had put on it to keep it warm. We arrived here in Dunster at about 5 p.m., the Luttrell Arms Hotel 2 miles inland, built in 1499. First, it was called the Ship, but then its name was changed as a compliment to the lords of the manor. It was the guest house of Cleve Abbey and grew up around a superb Gothic hall built by the abbot of Cleve in the 15th century. Tuesday, March 23rd, Wells. Explored Dunster. The castle was closed, but the village was enchanting. Our hotel overlooked a strange octagonal building, which was the yarn market used when Dunster was a center of weaving. Bought little things in a shop where the proprietor told us he had to remove 5 fireplaces before the original one was reached. The church was particularly proud of its 3 ancient chests, all still in use for valuables, papers, etc. One was plain dark oak. The second had a slanted top used by the monks as a desk, and the third had 5 padlocks in a row down the side. It took 5 men with 5 keys to be present for it to be opened. We left for Wells, and on the way passed a sign saying Alfoxden Park Hotel, Halford, Somerset, where William Wordsworth visited. Turn right. Turn right we did, and right again. Lovely country road, a relief after having been boxed in by hedgerows for many miles. We had a nice lunch alone in the bar, since the landlady said everyone was out exploring. Dark barrel chairs and beautiful brass hinges on the doors. On we went to Glastonbury. I wasn't particularly impressed by the ruins. They seemed almost artificial. The grass they stood on, too velvety, too well kept. King Arthur is supposedly buried there, and Joseph of Arimathea is said to have buried the Holy Grail under the Glastonbury Tor, once a pagan church, way on the top of a hill. But somehow, I didn't get much of a feeling of anything at all. Now, Wells is a different story. I love this place. It feels like a medieval town. The Vicar's Close is a marvelous street with its uniform little stone houses and blue doors and chimneys all in a row. The moat around the Bunhop Palace is full of dainty ducks. Only saw one swan who rang no bell, but the clock struck and the knights jousted round and round. I like the cathedral better than Salisbury's. Our 15th century inn was visited by William Penn, and it's right across the way from the cathedral gate where the poor sat waiting for alms. Wednesday, March 24th. Bath, Castlecombe, Bibury, and Burford. Happy birthday to Dolly! We left lovely Wells for Bath early this morning, just as people were getting the stalls up for market day in the square. Without difficulty, we found a car park and followed the signs to the Roman baths. They were discovered only 100 years ago when a house built over them suddenly sank, and there was an investigation as to the cause. The cause was found, and they now surmise there is a mile or more of further Roman remains, but they are beneath beautiful Georgian houses that no one wishes to destroy. How elegant those houses are, so proper, so well buttoned up, such an aristocratic air about them. Their similitude had the charm of well-bred carriage horses in tandem, not monotonous, just beautiful. Went to the costume museum and found some interesting Elizabethan blackwork. Finally found the car again, too, and on to Castlecombe for lunch. The village was very pretty, fairy tale place, thoroughly satisfying, but the lunch was a mistake. I didn't look in my famous guidebook, so we didn't go to the White Hart, where I had planned, but instead to the Castle Hotel, sort of a semi-secluded spot. Pretty, and the house was 17th century, but full of businessmen-type people and a poshy dining room. We didn't want a huge lunch, so we were served our sandwiches and coffee in what amounted to the entrance hall. It was quite a pleasant dark oak room with a nice fire going and the arms of the family over the mantelpiece and in the carved woodwork. Bill felt uncomfortable, but I just munched along on my daily cheese and biscuits. However, when they brought back no change after we had paid, thereby pocketing a tip practically the same amount as the bill, I was provoked. Only time such a thing happened during our trip. Stopped off at Cirencester for a minute or two, but I wanted to get on to Bibury, which really was a sweet place. We saw an old mill, the Arlington Mill, which was full of paraphernalia. Toy steam engines, china, stuffed animals, and a couple of rooms showing off period costumes. The quilt on one of the beds, I was told, was 250 years old. But most exciting were two smocks. Their best, I was told. The work ones had worn away. The embroidery denoted the county the men came from and their occupations. A lot of history is known here by almost everyone, but there doesn't seem to be much folk knowledge, and so far no one seems to have heard of Montague Dawson. Bill is astounded and annoyed. England's greatest marine painter, unknown in his own land? After we saw the mill, we walked across a field to the Arlington Row 15th century cottages, now preserved by the National Trust. Then we came on to Burford and found the Bay Tree Hotel, originally the home of Sir Lawrence Tanfield, the unpopular Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer during the reign of Elizabeth I. Dined by candlelight, delicious food, and after had coffee and chatted with a charming couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hopper, who offered us suggestions for the remainder of our trip. A thoroughly delightful evening. Thursday, March 25th. Burton-on-the-Water, Broadway, Warwick. We prowled around Burford after breakfast going into a museum, which used to be the town prison. It wasn't really open. They were getting ready for Easter, but the man was most gracious. When he realized how interested Bill was in the stone roofs of the Cotswold cottages, he explained how they were made. They quarry the stone, then leave it over a winter or two covered by a light layer of earth. The freezes split the stone in layers and, voila, they're slate stone tiles. Such weight. The beams of their houses have to be strong, but the people have learned architectural tricks to lessen and support the weight. The tiles last forever, but the beams don't. The grey skies of England seem so permanent, so unmovable. A wild wind can be blowing so strongly you can almost lie down on it, but the grey sky just stays there, immobile overhead. We've not had much rain, nor much sun for that matter. Who cares? From Burford, we went to Burton-on-the-Water, a lovely village. Some inspired citizen of the town once made a small model of his house, and liked it so much he made a model of every house in the little village in the back of his inn. We walked through it, the tallest church coming up to my hip. What fun that man must have had. Everything of the village is there, though the water wheel turns back and forth instead of round and round. The real village is built on both sides of a little stream called the Windrush, and in the model, you can cross over a diminutive windrush on a diminutive bridge. On the back of the tiny inn, there is the model of the model. Enchanting. You can look into the tiny churches through panes of clear glass to see the wee stained glass windows, while a tiny invisible organ plays, and small voices sing softly, softly. We crossed the real Windrush and visited Birdland, not crass like its name, all birds singing lustily with bright plumage conveying a sense of well-being. Many weren't caged at all. Plychrome parrots perched in the trees over our heads throughout the walk, but the penguins were the winners. A girl came out and fed them while we were there, and the side of the pool was glass, so we took pictures of them swimming. My, they are graceful. So jerky on land, so svelte in water. All around here are strange stone stools, shaped like mushrooms. I wonder what they really are. In some of the tiny gardens, one or two are used in place of a bench. We went on to Stow-on-the-Wold, which did not particularly impress us, nor did Broadway, though it is often touted as being the most picturesque village in England. After Burford, it came in a poor second. The Broadway Tower atop an extremely windy hill was fun, though. Apparently, in time long ago, the lady of the manor of Broadway wished to see or be seen by her ancestral home far away. She had a large fire, a beacon lit on the top of the hill, and when she found it could be seen, she said, "Build here." On a clear day, you can see 13 counties from the top of the tower. Unfortunately, the day was not clear, nor was the tower open, so we could not get to the top. Now we are in Warwick, at the West Gate, in an old, original Tudor house, spared by the fire that ravaged the town in the 17th century. Tudor House Hotel. It was renovated 10 years ago to be made more comfortable, but the Tudor element was carefully preserved. Our bedroom is no larger than a large dormer, and the door is only 4 feet tall and very creaky. Bill is determined to oil it. A beautiful big black beam stretches across the tiny mullioned windows, but the effect is ruined by a horrendous dressing table with an oval mirror directly in front of them. There are no bedside lamps and only one pillow each, but we do have a private bath, which is more than Elizabeth I had when she passed by on her way to Warwick or Kenilworth. We checked in and then went immediately out to see Kenilworth. Those ruins are full of atmosphere. Dark, rosy red remains of sculptured stones, great huge windows staring out blindly onto the green below, towers with stilts, cubby holes, and open greens. They're restoring the outer walls and the gardens. Friday, March 26th, Warwick. Today was for Warwick, and what a marvelous day it was. I was in my element, surrounded by the shades of Elizabeth and Dudley as we toured Warwick Castle, a truly impressive place. Intact after 800 years, we didn't miss an inch of it, though I had no desire to linger in the dungeon and couldn't bear to read the plaques on the torture instruments. They weren't in the main shown in the dungeon, but what they called the chains were there. There was sort of a cage fitted to a man's figure, and in it he was hung and left to rot. Horrible. The pale, misty English sun looked good and bright to me as we emerged. It is strange to realize that right on the other side of the green velvet courtyard in another tower was the banqueting hall. Lovely oak rooms, giant fireplaces, signs of full, if not gracious living, all just a stone's throw away from an even more grim oubliette than we had seen at Pevensey. Bill climbed Guy's tower, 132 steps. I collapsed halfway up and retreated to the fresh green lawn below. So many of the pictures in my books hang on the walls of the state apartments. Elizabeth I at her coronation painted on wood, Holbein's portrait of Henry VIII along with one of Anne Boleyn who looked positively dish-faced with brown hair, not the famous raven locks at all. We ate in the castle restaurant, and in the adjacent room they were preparing for an Elizabethan banquet. I could have stolen all their wood plates and goblets. Walked down by the peahens. The present Earl loves peacocks, but we only saw the hens and the Avon. Then we went to St. Mary's Church, where Robert Dudley's tomb is. So colorful. It's been restored to its original hues. There he lies in effigy, with his wife Lettice, who outlived him by 45 years, dying at the age of 95. Unbelievable even now, let alone in those days. In the center of the Beauchamp Chapel, though it's spelled Beauchamp, they pronounce it Beauchamp, lies the gilded bronze effigy of Richard Beauchamp, the Inquisitor of Joan of Arc. Lastly, in Warwick, we visited the Leicester Hospital, a home for ex-servicemen then and has so remained to this day. James I was entertained there. They still have his chair. And the burgesses of the town were in debt 10 years from that one evening. Saturday, March 27th, Stratford-on-Avon. Without a doubt, Mary Arden's house is the best of the Shakespeare places. We arrived there early, so early that I didn't think they were even open, but they were. We went in and had the guide all to ourselves. The house, before the Shakespeare Trust had bought it, had been lived in up to 1930. Mary Arden didn't marry until she was 21, practically an old lady. She was one of 8 daughters, and when her father died, leaving her the house and some money as a dowry, she suddenly became very eligible. John Shakespeare came a-courting. He had worked for her father and married her, taking her to Stratford. Her wealth helped him. He became a burgess, sort of a mayor, but with one thing and another, lost all the money in the end, and his house fell into the hands of Mary's brother-in-law. His sons, William and John, tried to buy it back, but to no avail. The Ardens were landed gentry, which meant they had about 30 teenage servants. The family slept in the loft, the mother and father in a bed. Beds were precious enough to be willed in those days. The girls around them on pallets, and the servants downstairs on the rushes that covered the stones. They all washed only once a year. In the fall, they were sewn into their clothes, and in May, on sweetening day, they took their annual bath, the family first. Kettles of hot water were added from time to time, but the last servant must have come out as dirty as he went in. They had candles, but mostly they burned tapers, reeds soaked in animal fat. Very smoky, very smelly. To counteract the evil odors, they had what they called a plague pan, a brass object similar to a bed warmer, but with many small holes in the top. This they would fill with coals and sweet-smelling herbs, and they would waft it around from room to room. The father's favorite seat was the inglenook, a sort of cubbyhole seat in the side of the hearth. Here he could observe his daughters and their suitors on the courting settle. He would give the young man a piece of wood, and he was supposed to whittle a spoon for his bride, which is the origin of the expression spooning. The bride would be expected to make her suitor a smock for his wedding day, thereby proving herself to be an accomplished needlewoman. Accomplishments were more important than looks. They drank 3 gallons of ale a day per person, sometimes 8 pints at a sitting. They drank out of round wood tankers, made in the fashion of little barrels with willow slips wrapped around the wood pieces. The willow were then wet, and as they dried, pulled the wood together to make it all watertight. The gentleman carried his own tankard with him to the pub, accompanied by his manservant, who would fetch the ale from the bar and bring it back to his master. The tankard was called a piggin, and the servant would whistle as he carried it to prove he was drinking none. That is the origin of the name pig and whistle that so many pubs use. I saw more of those stone mushrooms and a sign explaining them. They are called saddle stones, and when set up in a square in the rickyard would serve to support a platform of rough timber on which grain would be stacked, protected from the damp and the rodents. Mary Arden's house contained 2 beautifully preserved smocks behind glass, one belonging to a ploughman, the other to a wheelwright, as one could tell from the designs. Those designs were very important. Once a year there was a sort of fair called a May mop, to which men seeking employment and those wishing to hire would go. The embroidery on the smocks would indicate each man's skill, and the employers would thus know which man to speak to fill a particular need. 2 weeks after the May mop, there would be the runaway mop, when those who were unhappy in their new jobs could return and seek a different master. The May mop and the runaway mop still take place in the Wilmcote today, though it is just a festival time. We went to Anne Hathaway's cottage, which is more commercial. Not that you are urged to buy souvenirs particularly, but they have so many visitors that things are very much roped off. Trinity Church, where Shakespeare is buried, is lovely. There is a record of his baptism in the chained Bible, and many of his family are buried there. We walked on and around the gardens covering Shakespeare's demolished house, where he spent the last 6 years of his life, and then took a small tour around the countryside. Charlecot first, home of the Lucy family, with fallow deer lying on the grass and young bucks butting each other all by the main gates. It is said that Shakespeare was whipped by a member of the Lucy family for poaching a deer, which was what decided him to leave Stratford and go to London. Climbed Edgehill, in the car fortunately, and stopped where the Royalists had stood looking down on the Roundheads in the valley below. We passed Salgrave Manor, the ancestral home of George Washington, but it was closed, so we couldn't go in. Sunday, March 28th, London. Our trip to London was beautiful because we didn't ride on the main road. Our car, 4-wheel Clover, trembles with fear when she is forced to go too fast. That suits us fine. The British are mad drivers, though skilled. Their cars may tremble at speed, but they do not. Bill continually feels he is holding up traffic, and it drives him crazy. When we are way over to the left, and I'm nearly in the ditch, I know that he is trying to make a caravan of cars pass around him, not over him. Tailgating is a way of life. Anyway, the drive was lovely. Green, rolling hills dotted with sheep, just like in all the picture books. So many baby lambs, and some are spotted black and white. We were sort of shunted off the road when we got to London, but I think it was the right exit. Only we didn't know where we were, and Bill got honked at, which was the end. He hates to be honked at, which is putting it mildly, though the English seem to honk all the time. It's a regular conversation. Sometimes it means hello, sometimes watch out, I'm coming through, sometimes what is wrong with you? Long honks, short honks, but we can't interpret them, and they all upset Bill. In spite of all that, within a few minutes, we were safe and sound in front of our hotel, the Green Park on Half Moon Street. It is very shabby but comfortable. We overlook a quiet courtyard, and I see the branches of a tall tree from my bed. Bill doesn't, because the beds are arranged peculiarly, head to head. After lunch, we walked down to the Science Museum and looked at a lot of beautiful machines. I like the ones made of wood and brass. Bill said he learned how reed switches worked at last, but he knew all the rest. I like the old-fashioned coach and the model of the Egyptian well, clay jars going round and round drawing the water. After, we went to the Victoria and Albert so that I could show Bill the beautiful Raphael cartoons. He made them to be copied for tapestries, one of which is there too. After dinner, we took a short walk to Piccadilly and then back here. I had no desire to explore Soho. I'm not a city person. I'll be glad to get back to the pleasant Leah again. Monday, March 29th, London. Having walked to the Victoria and Albert yesterday, today we walked to the National Gallery and to the British Museum. Bill was on a concentrated hunt for Montague Dawson. So far, no one has heard of him in this country. Bill continues to be astonished and disgusted. Dawson was not in the National Gallery at all, but Leonardo and Michelangelo were, and Murillo and Holbein. Bill, distressed by the lack of Dawson, couldn't have cared less, but I pushed on. The Renaissance painters hold happy associations, and loving English history as I do, it's exciting to look at a Holbein, even when I don't know anything about art. We headed towards the British Museum, not to visit it, but to go to Foyle's, the largest bookstore in London, where Bill hoped to find at least a book on Dawson. They had no book, but at least they had heard of him. Dropping the hunt for a little while, we took a taxi to the tower, and I finally saw the Norman Chapel, and it was exquisite. I also saw much armor. Henry VIII must indeed have towered over the other men of his time. The yeomen of the guard were good guides. I knew most of what they said, and there isn't any way to lift the feeling of death and pain from the tower. So much blood was spilled there that it's hard to remember that it was a palace as well as a grim place of incarceration. They are sandblasting one section, and the stone has returned to a lovely pale tan, which does make the idea more plausible. The White Tower may be white again. Some people will resent the patine of the ages removed, but I thought it was interesting to see how it was when it was built. Beecham's Tower is full of the inscriptions of the unfortunate prisoners, some quite beautifully carved, but when you consider how long it took, you realize how long they endured a miserable existence. We didn't go into the Bloody Tower, so famous for its numerous poisonings. We returned to our Dawson hunt and taxied out to Greenwich, to the Maritime Museum. After great blank looks on the part of the guards, Bill did discover one Dawson himself, on loan in the 1914 War Room. No time for the gypsy moth or the cutty sark. We bussed back to London. We did see the observatory from afar, though. Tonight, we went to the Gilbert and Sullivan restaurant. Lots of fun. Letters, programs, pictures, and posters lined the walls. The waitress was so pleasant. She told us that the Gilbert and Sullivan memorabilia belonged to Whitbread, an ale company that owns a whole string of inns. Anyway, when she heard of Skip's interest, she insisted on giving us a menu to take back to him. Tuesday, March 30th, London. We walked up New Bond Street, and I went into a couple of shops to look at the smock dresses. I had heard they sold picture smocking, and the first shop had seen it, but they had none in stock. Said they imported the dresses with pictures from Spain. The other shop had exquisite dresses with motifs but not pictures. $90 for a size 1. We also went into several galleries, still looking for Dawson. The effort was crowned with success, for at last we met up with a dealer who called him England's greatest marine painter, and Bill was able to buy 3 prints. Then, Bill went to Chelsea College, University of London, and I walked all through Green Park and around Buckingham Palace. In the evening, we went to the carvery, where they have every kind of roast cooked rare, medium, or well done, and you carve your own. Wednesday, March 31st, Cambridge. Tonight, we are in a very posh hotel, a member of a group called Prestige Hotels, the Garden House Hotel. Our windows overlook a lovely little rock garden and a bit of green lawn on which ducks are resting before they jump into the cam a few feet away. Our room is equipped with a color TV controlled from the bed if you want, though they ask you to please unplug the set before you go to sleep. Push-button radio, of course, and a private bar offering scotch, gin brandy, and vodka. You push a button, get a shot, and the cost of your drink is recorded at the desk. There's a little balcony, but though the sun has come out, it is too chilly for that. It's pretty, though, with the young willows leaning over the stream. We walked all over Cambridge, first the King's Chapel, which is truly superb, then around to Scott's Polar Museum, which was interesting. I found his last letter to Mrs. Wilson, telling her of her husband's death, very moving. At the Fitzwilliam Museum, I I peeked at a few illuminated manuscripts and wandered among my old friends, the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Minoans. Then onto the Whipple Science Museum, which interested Bill a lot. It's small but well displayed. He wished they had had working models. Too bad we wouldn't see the Cavendish laboratory, but you have to have an appointment there. The mathematical bridge here is interesting. It crosses the Cam at Queen's College and originally was built without bolts. After it was taken apart to see how it was done, no one could put it back together without the bolts. Thursday, April 1st, Thetford. Arrived here in Thetford fairly early and found rooms at once at the Bell, an old Tudor Daub and Waddle coaching inn. Since the room wasn't ready, we visited the sights of the town. Ruins of an 11th century priory, more impressive to me than those Hollywoodish ruins at Glastonbury. Then we went to the Little Town Museum, full of Saxon items. The guard told us this town dated from the 8th century and used to be known for its manufacture of railway engines from 1720 to 1930. Now other factories are moving in, for Thetford is one of London's spillover towns. Upstairs in the museum was quite an exhibit of flint chips, heads for spears, etc., and the guard asked us if we had gone to the Neolithic flint mines. He also said that to this day, no one is sure what flint really is, though the most prevalent theory today is that it is the silica remains of microscopic sea animals living in sponges. The fact that all this country was marshy until just a few hundred years ago lends credence to that theory. The guard also told us that the Neolithic man had to mine the flint with the antlers of the red deer. They are still extant. The guard had seen 16 of them in the Thetford forest a few weeks before. Thetfield Forest is the largest forest today in England. Thetford is the birthplace of Tom Paine, and there was a death mask of him in the museum. His nose looked smushed sideways. In the afternoon, we motored to Higham, the town of Abe Lincoln's ancestors. There is a bust of Lincoln in the church. We met a man in front of the church whose name was Bernard Soloway. He had just gotten a U.S. patent for the buffer interface between human and computer. He was pleasant, took us on a small walk around the town, showed us the bricked-up windows on a house which happened during the time of the window tax, General Ironside's house, World War II fame, and pointed out the Dutch influence in the roof tiles of the houses. The British, centuries ago, had imported the Dutch to aid them in draining the fens. I saw many, many ring-necked pheasants in the fields and thought there could have been no hunting, until, at that moment, saw two men with guns. We went to Grimes' graves, the Neolithic human, and Bill climbed down a vertical ladder into the pit. I stayed topside and took a picture of him coming up. Our bedroom here is immense, complete with a huge open hearth, over which there is a whole wall of Elizabethan murals discovered when they restored the inn a few years ago. Dusty red and black, sort of crude Tudor rose design with a geometric border. Friday, April 2nd, Aldeburgh. Here we are overlooking the North Sea on an enchanting fishing village. The fishermen had beached their boats as we drove up. We're staying at the Brudenell Hotel. We walked all over the town, with its cold, colorful cottages all named individually, Bell, Lavender, etc. We had lunch at a pub full of friendly fishermen. Aldeburgh is the home of Benjamin Britten, the composer and one of the directors of its Festival of Music and the Arts in June. In the afternoon, we went over to Thorpeness to see the House in the Clouds. It was a little red cottage built on the top of a dark wood tower building 6 stories high. We knew people were living in it, for gaily colored laundry was flapping away in the brisk wind. Saturday, April 3rd, Tring. I'd never heard of Tring. We picked it because it is quite close to Heathrow, our destination tomorrow. The drive over here from Aldeburgh was perfectly beautiful, with the exception of getting through Ludden and Dunstable. Leatham and Clare are lovely villages, and the countryside between is a fairyland of green, rolling hills, tiny hamlets, and thatched cottages. We're at the Rose and Crown Inn, originally the gatehouse for the Gore Manor. In the 19th century, it was bought by Rothschild, and he turned the Tudor gatehouse into this inn when the townspeople told him they thought they were prosperous enough to warrant a hotel. His son was a great naturalist and zoologist with an immense collection of specimens of mammals, birds, fish, and insects. He willed this private collection to the British Museum, so it now has a branch right here. Sunday, April 4th, Heathrow. We left the Rose and Crown early to escape the traffic going to London, since our destination is the Skyway Heathrow Hotel. We had to turn the car in by noon anyway. Transient airport hotels are all the same. Least said, the better, but the location is great and very easy on the nerves. Monday, April 5th, Heathrow, Baltimore. Naturally, we arrived at Heathrow before the ticket counters were open, but finally they were, our places were confirmed, and we moved along. They sort of have turnstiles where you show your passport again before you go to the passenger lounge. Bill got in one line and I in another. When the man opened my passport, a look of utter astonishment came over his face. I peeked, then cried, "My God, that's my husband!" The ticket people had mixed them up. The passport man said, "This could be quite amusing," and suggested dryly that Bill and I go through together. We boarded the plane without further amusements and flew home.